Yeah, so a topic that has been really, I think, on a lot of church planters' minds during this time is the topic of how do I do missions? How do I do evangelism? How do I reach out? And especially in this world that's increasingly virtual, where we're having a lot of meetings online, and so we know there's some advantage to that, and also some disadvantages. But so that's really what we want to talk about today. And I'm here with Mark Bustrom, pastor at Igreja de Lapa in Lisbon, Portugal, and Ralph Cunnington, pastor of City Church Manchester. Did I say that right? Is that right?
Exactly right. Good one.
In the UK, yeah. So great to have you guys for this conversation here that we get to have together. I'm going to start with Ralph. We got a couple questions for both of you, and then we're going to just open it up. Ralph, how has missions and evangelism changed in your ministry and in your church during this time, during the last couple of months in this coronavirus?
Well, I guess in some ways, nothing has changed. And in some ways, everything has changed. So the content of our message hasn't changed. A lot of what we do hasn't changed either. So the main bread and butter of our evangelism is through what we do when we preach the gospel, through what we do in seekers groups, through what we do in personal conversations. The big thing that has changed is the medium for doing that. So with everything going online, whether it's services on Facebook Live or YouTube, whether it's the way we conduct our conversations being over Zoom, all of that medium has changed. And of course, actually, that does mean that the way we convey the message has changed in certain ways as well. The message hasn't changed, but the medium has necessitated different ways to communicate that. As a church, we're already seeking to go online and deliver online a lot of our teaching, preaching material and outreach. And we'd already worked quite hard on our social media platforms, particularly on Facebook. But we've run that up quite significantly. And we've changed some of the ways that we do our services to make it more friendly for the medium of viewing it online, viewing it on your sofas in your lounge rather than meeting together physically. We've seen phenomenal opportunities actually over the last 8 weeks. So wonderfully, we've seen two professions of faith. One was a lady who'd been attending our church for 18 months before lockdown. A lot had been doing her work in her heart, and it was 2 weeks into lockdown she professed faith. The other person we know of, she just started watching online, having a friend who was a member of City Church who said, "Why don't you watch online?" And she professed faith after watching for a few weeks and engaging over Zoom in conversations with this friend from City Church and another Christian friend. So the medium has changed, the message hasn't, but the way we deliver the message really has, and we've had to tailor it for that. We've seen a real upsurge in interest, so we're running a Christianity Explored group that starts beginning of June on Zoom. And lots of people are inviting who perhaps weren't inviting before, because an online invite is easier in the social media Generation Z. Doing a Facebook friend invite is a lot easier. And I think we've just seen a real uptake in interest as a result of that.
So I know we wouldn't think of ourselves as old guys, but in some ways you could say, like us old guys, we're just now like starting to do some of the things that people 20 years younger than us are probably already doing, kind of inviting that way. Yeah, that's interesting. And Mark, what's been your approach during this time, leading your church? What have you guys done anything differently? Not, or how's that look?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is going to be exactly what Ralph just spoke about, was that in a lot of ways, we continue just to push forward in the preaching and teaching of the gospel, and continuing to say that even during this extraordinary time in our world, nothing has changed about gospel advancement. And so we even found ourselves, I think, just sovereignly by God's Spirit directing us in the book of Acts during this time. So we started preaching through Acts in January, and it's been phenomenal to see that just like in Acts, events do not stop the advancement of the gospel. And so, so in one sense, everything has just continued on. just in a very different way. And so kind of like what Ralph talked about, everything's online now. Although I would say one of the challenges that we're running into is that despite maybe some opportunity, despite some new ways for the same gospel message to be sent out and now on Zoom calls and Facebook Live and through live transmissions on Sunday mornings or Bible studies or prayer times or whatever, we also are noticing that there are real limitations to an online presence. And so what we're doing is saying, let's continue to take advantage of what the gospel can do in this moment in time, but with understanding what the limitations are, being very cognizant of those limitations, and then as well yearning for what it would mean to physically be back together as the church, and seeing this more as a temporary time and not as a permanent time. I know some things will change permanently, and that's even a question we've had as a leadership team at Lapa, to say, okay, what do we need to continue doing that we didn't do online, because it represents reaching people in a new and different way. But at the end of the day, what's the end goal? And I think for us, the end goal is always to continue to do physical church together.
Yeah, so that brings up, a lot of things that maybe stopped and weren't able to continue. So the gospel didn't stop its power or anything like that. It didn't become lame. But what are some things maybe that you had to postpone or push pause on because of this crisis?
Yeah, so I mean, anything that represented a physical gathering obviously had to be either put online, and if it couldn't go online as an online format, then it did have to be postponed. And so there was some stuff like just engagement plans, outreach events, gatherings that would represent just the physical aspect of how we do ministry, that had to change really quickly. And so, I think that was one of the really positive aspects of, just as I look across Europe, to see churches just really respond and creatively find solutions to now what is our new reality. And so, so almost the entire year has changed so dramatically that the things that we were planning for spring and summer, and we're in the midst of planting a new church. And so imagine how that has just completely switched gears with us, and how we have to all of a sudden go, listen, we're still planting the church. The gospel's not stopping. But what do we do now to engage the community that we're planting the church in, but now virtually and online and in just a completely different format? And so I think it's interesting to see what has changed, in the sense of, okay, now the physical meetings have had to stop for a while. And here in Portugal, there is the possibility at the end of the month to begin to meet together, just in a very different way. So 1/3 capacity with certain regulations and rules and whatnot. And who knows how long that will last throughout the year. But it definitely has changed, in the sense of things were canceled, things were put online, and now we kind of have this new reality that we're living through and in, and hoping for and praying for really continued gospel advancement, continued gospel engagement, but just in a very different way that we anticipated as we even began to start the year, or even planned for this year.
And Ralph, where you guys are, have you had the same issue as far as, like, are you guys able to meet together at all right now, or
No, so we're not able to physically meet. So the limitation currently in the UK is you're allowed to meet someone outside of your household as long as you meet them outside and stay 2 meters away. So that makes meeting as a church quite difficult. So we're not meeting as a church. We had to change quite a few things. We changed our preaching series, actually. So our original plan at this time was to do a series called Eat, Pray and Sing, starting off with eating, all based in Luke's gospel, and learning from Jesus about the importance of sharing meals. That felt rather insensitive at a time where it was impossible to share meals. And the realization that we were going online, where people's attention span was limited, where people would dip in and dip out, we decided to move. We normally sequentially preach through books of the Bible, but we decided to move to a preaching series that was standalone in the parables of Jesus. from Luke's gospel, because that enabled people to dip in, and it also changed the way that we shaped what we were doing. So we called the series "Life Hacks from Jesus," and frankly, some of that is clickbait, having controversial topics to encourage people to dip in just for a one-off to then engage them. We tried to work out how we do, because the gospel is displayed not just in the proclamation of the gospel, but seeing it lived out in community. We tried to work out how we convey that through some of the things we're doing. After service chats on Zoom would be an example of that, but doing things like quizzes and bringing our prayer meetings online, and our midweek connect groups, doing lots of online things, including bringing friends into those. So we've adapted that. We also were due to plant a church next month. We'd had a 2-year build up to that. We're a city centre hub church, but we're planting a church into one of the northern suburbs, so much more focused upon reaching that geographical locality. So that's been a real challenge, because if you're not able to see people in geographical locality, online presence is not such a big thing for them. It is for us as a church for Manchester as a whole, but for them it's more challenging. So they've delayed their public launch, but are still meeting as small groups and thinking through how do we build relationships with our neighbours over the fence. Yeah,
that's really interesting. And thinking about that you guys have fences there. That's
we do.
What's a fence?
An Englishman's house is his castle.
It must be in the suburbs then. Yeah. And I'm also impressed at your gospel humility, because you owned up to clickbait and not me. That was really good. So it's interesting. You guys both were in the process of planning a church and kind of having to weave your way through that. So this, no one knows how long all this is going to last, and if the restrictions will come back or not, and everything. Everyone seems to know, but everyone has different answers. So some people are saying like it could last another year of certain kinds of restrictions, especially on groups like churches. So if there is some mandate to keep distance, what are we just gonna some people are saying, well, we'll just pause our evangelism and missions at church planting right now, and we'll wait and see. How would you respond, either of you guys, to those comments?
It's a good question, Kelly, because it kind of cuts to the heart of what we're facing, and kind of a new world that we live in, and returning not to the normal that we've experienced in the past, but a new normal. And so that's going to be the big question. So obviously the short answer is, by no means are we going to stop, evangelism or missions advancement. And we know that because that's what the gospel does. And so we can trust the gospel, and we can trust the advancement of the gospel. We can trust that the Spirit is going to work, even in the midst of these challenging times, and the fact that, we can't meet physically. And so that would be the short answer. I think the long answer, and one thing I do want to address this morning with you guys, and love to hear your thoughts as well. I really do think, though, we need to see this time that we're distancing and online as a tool and as a bridge, but then that comes with a warning. And so quickly, as a tool, I really do feel like it can be used in amazing ways to transmit the gospel, because the virtual world is incredible. I think maybe I could compare it to the invention of the printing press, and then all of a sudden being able to print the actual Bible and have it in people's hands. This is just a phenomenal way the internet can be used to spread the gospel virtually. And not only that, but in this time, it gives us the opportunities like we've described. We can do prayer meetings online. We can do Bible studies. We can do seeker Bible studies. We can reach out. We can do Facebook ads and find people that are interested in Christianity and start discussions with them. It's amazing what we can do. But we also need to know what the limitations are of this tool. And so the tool is incredible, but we can never let the tool drive our strategy or drive our engagement. And so we have to use it in a way that is reflective of a good use of the tool, and being cognizant of the fact that this tool can quickly take over and be the main thing. And so, we've already talked about just in our context of Zoom fatigue and the challenges of always being online and the false sense of community that it creates. I know this is quite incendiary, but a lot of times I say that tech and the online presence is a cheap substitute for actual Christian community, and it is, because if that's all we have, then it does create quite a few limitations. And so I think it should be used as a tool, but in a good way. And then as a bridge, I really think we need to see this time as a bridge between this time where we can't meet together and the time that we can meet together. And so I think that we see it as a bridge in the way that we can anticipate coming together back physically, but not seeing this as stuck in time. And so I think that, could this last forever? Possibly. Could this possibly be the new reality? Oh goodness, I hope no. Please, Jesus, come before that would happen. But I think we can see it as a bridge to get us back to physical community, gathering as the people of God, connecting those people that the gospel reached during this time. I think we can see it as a bridge. And then there's the warning, and the warning is really, and I can't emphasize this enough, and then I'll terminate with this, but the warning is just to be careful during this time, because I do believe that only online presence does tend to create some sort of spiritual community atrophy within our muscles. And so when everything is online, we tend to forget what it's like to be physically with the body of Christ. And so, and just to give an example, online, I determine how I want to be patient with other people. I can recuse a call or refuse a call. I can decide how I engage. I can shut it down if I want to. When you're physically with somebody, your patience is tested. In Portugal, it's probably tested a little bit more than the UK, because people talk crazy amounts. We always are talking, being together, all this kind of stuff. I'm like, at the end of Sunday, after being there 8 hours, I'm like, I just want to go home. And everybody just keeps talking for hours and hours and hours. And so my patience is tested, and my sanctification is tested, because physically we're together. Online, we have much more control over that. And so the warning is to be careful that we're not letting those muscles, those community muscles, atrophy during this time, but we're yearning for and desiring for that time when we can come back together as a community of faith and continue to do physically what the church is, because there is the visible and the invisible, but you can't have one without the other. So we desperately do need the visible expression of church, which is that physical connection, contact, continuing to do the tasks that we've been given physically together as the church.
Good word. I don't want to leave Ralph out on that point. If you got something to add there,
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that we haven't actually gained any new tools as a result of coronavirus. We've just come to realize what has always been there. The importance of online presence, the importance of Facebook and Facebook Live, the importance of putting our talks and other messages, our different ways to reach and provoke interest on YouTube. I think one of the good things that it's done is stimulated more of an every member ministry. So there's tended to be quite a dependency upon the word ministers, a kind of almost clergy laity divide. But because we've had to become much more creative about how we communicate the gospel, we found that's brought in lots more members of the church to get involved and think creatively. How do we use animation to present the gospel online? How do we come up with interesting podcasts that stimulate people's interest? So I think it's made us think more about how to use the tools that are already available. And I really, really hope that continues. I completely agree. This is not right. We should be unhappy about the situation. My most miserable day of the week at the moment is Sundays, because that's where I grieve what I've lost. And I grieving the loss of physical presence, sitting physically under the ministry of the word, sharing the sacraments with my family. That's something to grieve and to long for a restoration to what it should be, which is an anticipation, of course, of what it will eternally be when we're with Christ, feasting with him in the new heavens and new earth. So I think, I agree. I think we need to leverage the tools we've got, and we need to remember those lessons and bring them into the future, whatever that looks like. On mission more widely, so not just local outreach, one of the things that this has done for us is made those who are physically close to us feel more distant, and made those who are physically far from us feel much closer. So one of the most precious times in lockdown for us as a church has been our prayer meetings, where we've had our church planting partners overseas in Dubai, in Connecticut, with us on a Zoom call, not just presenting what's going on in their church context, but in the breakout rooms praying with our church members. And that's been one of the surprising delights of our time, which has just brought a togetherness in mission for us. And that was really celebrated last week on our Mission and Ministry Sunday, where there was a real feeling of togetherness that we've never had before, because we've always felt so physically distant. But this has been a real leveler. Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And I would say that that is one of the incredible things just globally that's happened, is there seems to be an increased awareness of our need to be together and work together for kingdom work. And so that's very encouraging. And I think I'm hoping that, Ralph, what we can do is keep these good parts as we move towards back to physical gatherings, so that we can be reminded of what this means to be interconnected on a global level for the sake of the gospel. But then as we then move in towards more of the physical gatherings as well. And like you said, to use those tools. And I think an interesting part is that sometimes I think for churches that have been launched into this new wide, brave world, is that these are new tools to them. They're certainly not new tools. They've been around forever. But I think especially in Southern Europe, we've not had to use these tools like you've had in the North. Simply because if you've ever visited Portugal or some of the other Southern European countries, they don't take advantage of some of the interesting things on the internet as frequently, I think, as the North is. Even the church is, in terms of evangelism and engagement. And so I think some communities, some churches are using this for the first time and realizing, number one, their potential, but then also on the flip side, realizing how as good as it could be, it's not everything.
I think it's worth saying we're moving in stages as well. So I think initially the first 3 weeks, the church was rushing to adapt all over the world of bringing things online. My observation, both at City Church and elsewhere, is that things are tailing off in terms of people's interest. Views are down across the board, and people are starting to drift. I think we're now into a period where innovation is absolutely crucial. On every level of how we're doing ministry, innovation, how we partially care for our people, but innovation in terms of how we're reaching people. People aren't just surfing around the internet looking for something to watch anymore. We need to think carefully, how do we properly engage them? How do we do things that they haven't seen before? How do we do things that actually keep their attention? There's a major attention deficit for most people, particularly at the moment. And we just need to think much more creatively and innovatively for the next few months.
I know one thing we've seen in Germany that's been interesting is, I mean, probably similar in other places, but we have a high number of people who live alone here. I think we're one of the highest in Europe as far as people who live in an apartment by themselves. It's really amazing, probably because of the business community here. But we've seen real fatigue and sometimes loneliness, but even just like a separation anxiety type thing among singles and or people living alone, and so I also think kind of like the digital, virtual, and the physical side of that, we have some opportunities on the physical side, even within the limits that we've been given by the government, to create some spaces. So in Germany, we've got a little more freedom, maybe it sounds like, than you guys. We're able to meet again in fairly small capacity, like Mark was mentioning. And then also two households can meet one another right now, which, if you have a family and a single, it's two households, and it feels more than two people. But I think, whether somebody's a believer or not, all of them are going through that same fatigue. So it's not only a pastoral care thing, but it really is an opportunity for mission, especially in Central Europe or Central Western Europe, that we haven't had as much before, because one of the difficulties of people being in an apartment by themselves has been a real lack of contact. Like they're to the subway, they're into the building where they work, up to the skyscraper, back to the apartment. And this has provided more opportunities, even with kind of strangers, which, this isn't typically the place that people do stranger street evangelism. In Germany, that doesn't come across so well. Maybe it does somewhere, and but this is the place there. People really need that contact, and I've noticed even with like neighbors and other people, just even we had some mass that passed out and things like that with some chocolate. So, because it was just mass, it's kind of weird. But even that, it's like there was immediate openness. Whereas if I had left a bar of chocolate or something with somebody before, it would have been really strange. So, like virtual world.
I would say too, just based on what you're saying, Kelly, is that one way that our virtual presence can help as we then this year begin to transition back to physical community and kind of the new normal that we have, is that I think that a lot of what's happening either in society or just generally in our world is driven by fear. And so we're having to deal with this more and more as a church, is how do we deal with this paralyzing fear that people have, whether it's fear of getting back to the physical aspect of life, or whether it's just a paralyzing fear of what's happening in our world. And so I really do believe that we do have an opportunity to help people understand the root of fear, what the gospel says about fear, who Jesus is, and how he helps us to conquer fear by his death on the cross and give us new life. And all of those things, I think, really segue into how we're going to be able to minister to people online to address the fear so that they can be physically with one another and hopefully in our churches as these restrictions lift over this next year. But I think that's a key issue, is that how are we going to address fear? And I think like we were talking about, Ralph was mentioning the tools that have been there. Absolutely, these are tools that then we can use to address fear and address what's going on in people's hearts. And I think people are really going to latch onto that. And we can use this as then we hopefully transition into more physical gatherings throughout the year. But this is just one thing that I think we need to work on, and that's going to be present because we see this. I see this in our neighbors. I see this out on the street. I see this in the way that even churches and deciding whether or not they should get back or not. All of this, and of course, we're not judging one way or the other, whether we want people to do things in safety and do things with a good conscience. But when fear drives it, it's going to produce some really, really bad results. But when we can have the gospel drive that and address fear, I think we've got some incredible opportunities online to deal with that and to really reach people where they're at.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on it, Mark, in terms of people's fear of death. So people aren't just fearful of getting sick with COVID-19; they're fearful of dying. And Hebrews 2 teaches us that Jesus came and died, so we might be freed from our slavery to the fear of death. And one of the most appealing apologetics will be as the church shows that in the weeks and months ahead. And there's just a real danger with all the media presentation of what's going on, that we can live fearful lives. And so I think as pastors, one of the primary ways we can be serving our church family and serving our communities is by helping us cling to the gospel, which is life in the face of fear of death, which means we're set free from that. And I think that's one of the things we as pastors need to be really working on, to care for our people, but also to reach our cities.
Okay, now it's time for the lightning round. And that just means because we kind of exhausted most of our time well. But with our lightning round, they're not really questions, they're just topics. And I'd like for each of you to, is it positive, a negative, or an undecided? And then you can make a quick comment, but like try to keep it like at one sentence. So we'll boil it down. That's what we're going for here. Okay. And for the 800,000 people that will probably watch this video, they can write you hate mail later if they didn't like your answer. So we're going for 800,000. That's our new goal.
Nice.
Okay. All right, you ready? Positive, negative, or undecided? Online church.
I hate it. I don't like it. It's terrible. I'll do it right now, but overall, let's get back to physical church.
Yeah, I think it's an oxymoron in that you can't properly gather in that sense. However, showing church online, permanent good, but that's not how you belong to a church long term.
Virtual discipleship.
Definitely has its place, and I like that it's a bridge, but it's not the real thing, and so we need to recognize that it's a bridge and not the only way to do it. In some circumstances, that's the only way to do it. I have opportunities to share and disciple with some people because we're physically very distant in different countries, and that's incredible. So let's promote that. But when there's opportunity for physical, let's get back to the physical one-to-one, looking at people in the eyeballs and sharing life with them.
Yeah, I'd say both and. You need to model life on life, and you can do that only in person. One of the big changes I think we'll experience is that we will do much more discipleship by Zoom. It gives flexibility for people who are working to be able to do a Zoom call before work and afterwards. So that's one of the long-term changes I see happening at City Church.
Online prayer meetings.
I think this exactly, Ralph nailed it. So it is exactly the same thing. It offers flexibility. We've seen opportunities to incorporate people that wouldn't necessarily be a part of the physical gathering on, let's say, our Thursday night prayer meeting. And that's been really encouraging. And so as a leadership team, we've had to say, what will we continue even when we get back physically? And I think these are some good things that we could continue to offer to society at large or our city and continue to promote the gospel through those kind of things.
Yes, I think we'll continue it alongside prayer meetings in person, both and.
All right. Digital evangelism campaign.
That's a loaded question. It has its place, and I still think, and I still would argue for the most effective gospel presentation is one that you do in person. But I will never deny the fact that we can do it online. Our church has produced gospel materials that we can share, videos, just whatever we do to promote that, to send it out, to get it as wide and far as possible. And so I would never limit the power of the gospel is to save. And so we just want to allow that to do it, whatever context or format it gets. And so I would say we still want to strive for accuracy on what the gospel is and be very wide and open to how the gospel gets out.
More and more evangelism. Let's have it all.
Okay.
Have your cake and eat it.
All right. I'm going back to Ralph on this one, and we'll go to Mark's sake. Live stream.
I think it's great. We'd love to do it. We're not doing it currently. It's actually really difficult to do it well and reliably.
So we are doing live stream, live stream through YouTube, and we have talked that when we come back physically at the end of the month, that one of our services will still have to be live streamed because we have people that don't necessarily want to come back, and that's a personal decision that they have to make. And then we also realize and recognize that we're reaching maybe a population that needs to stay home during this time, an elderly population, a population maybe that has difficulty getting back to church. And so we've said, probably we should continue this because it still is a great way to not only provide church for those who can't, but then continue to do what we do through the physical gatherings as well.
Okay, the next one's more about how do you feel when you hear this word. Okay. Ralph, Zoom meeting.
Tired. Genuinely feel Zoom exhausted. I think partly because I'm an extrovert, so I like being with people in person, and so I feel tired at this sort of pseudo conversation. Not this one. I'm enjoying this one very much.
Thank you very much. I've tried hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Besides this one, exactly what Ralph said. They're very tiring. I'm tired of them. I'm sick of them. I want them to end. I want to use technology like Zoom when it's appropriate and not every single day. And so, like right now, I want to be able to hit Ralph on the back and say, "I love you, brother," and it's good to meet each other and pray for each other. And that's really difficult to do over Zoom because it's just not the same.
All right, so we have two more. Online baptism.
Ooh, you saved the good ones for the last one. So we have taken, definitely thumbs down, 100% thumbs down. I know that's controversial. I know there are some certain exceptions where that would be needed, and so I'm not against it. When we talk about the persecuted church, for example, I understand that could be a context in which there would have to be some sort of an online baptism due to safety and security of the gathered group of believers, that kind of stuff. I would say, as a church in Lapa here in Lisbon, we have decided to wait to do communion and baptism, simply because we really feel that it's important that we are physically together to see those things worked out. Remembering again that baptism and the Lord's Supper is a representation, a picture of the gospel when we participate in it. And so we have made the decision. I know this is very controversial for me to say this, but we have made the decision not to do those things until we are physically together.
We are broadly in agreement. So we are not currently celebrating the Lord's Supper because the crucial to the physical sign, it seems to us, is that we are one in terms of physical presence. We haven't actually tackled the question of baptism. I would see there is a difference in that the physical sign can be carried out and physical participation by the whole is not necessary in baptism, but we'd insist on a word minister administering it, and that could potentially be broadcast online. We don't have plans to, because we're hoping we'll be able to have a big baptism service as soon as we're back.
So when you talk,
okay,
so you are talking about somebody's actually going, like, they're getting wet. Somebody's getting wet. Let's just say it that way. And but we're not saying like throwing water through the screen or something like that.
Oh, definitely not that.
Virtual baptism.
Yeah, no virtual, no, nothing like that. It has to be physical immersion.
Yeah, I got it, but just in case. All right, and the last one, the City to City Europe Connect project, which is what this is.
2 thumbs up, my friend. 2 thumbs up. I love what City to City is doing. We are big advocates of City to City here in Lisbon. We've seen it support and just transform churches and pastors and church planters. And so we're excited about what City to City continues to do and offer as they support this ongoing church planting movement within Portuguese churches here locally and then all across Europe. And that's exciting to see.
Yeah, I think City to City Europe are doing a great job of looking after churches, getting us to think innovatively, getting us to think creatively, and encouraging our hearts. So we're grateful to City to City Europe for that.
Thank you guys so much for taking your time to be here today.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.